Welcome to Story Sale English. Today, we begin the story of Wu Zetian, the only woman in Chinese history to rise from the inner palace all the way to the imperial throne. Itself, this is not just a story about ambition. It is a story about survival, brilliance, danger, and the terrible price of victory. If you only remember Wu Zetian as the only female emperor, then you have not really seen her. The true shock of her life is not simply that she became emperor, but that she began in a place where a woman was never supposed to win at all. Even her beginning is wrapped in uncertainty. Later generations argued over her original name, her birthplace, and even details of her birth. What is certain is that she was born into the family of Wu Shihuo, not into the imperial house itself. The woman who would one day shake an empire did not enter history under the name Wu Zetian. She had to grow into that name through struggle, calculation, and sheer force of will. She entered the palace at the age of 14 as a concubine of Emperor Taizong of Tang. She was young, beautiful, intelligent, and almost certainly already sharper than the role assigned to her. But youth and beauty were never rare inside an imperial palace. Taizong had many women. For 12 long years, she remained there without rising very far, one more ornament inside a world built to swallow young women whole. Those 12 years could easily have erased her. Many entered the palace and vanished into silence, leaving behind no voice and no power. Wu, however, was not made to disappear quietly. A famous story later attached to her tells of a fierce imperial horse that no one could tame. She supposedly said she could subdue it with an iron whip, an iron hammer, and a dagger. Whether or not the story is literally true, it reveals the image she wanted the world to remember. A woman who did not believe gentleness alone could keep anyone alive. Then the emperor died, and the palace doors that had enclosed her opened only into another kind of confinement. According to custom, she and the other former concubines were sent to a Buddhist convent. Her hair was cut. Silk gave way to plain robes. Incense replaced court music. For many women, this would have been the end of the story, the quiet burial of a life that had once brushed against power. For Wu, it became an interval, not an ending. At the convent, fate returned in the person of the next emperor. Gaozong visited the temple and saw her again. She wept. He was moved. On the surface, it looked like an emotional reunion. In reality, it opened a hidden passage back into the center of power. And the cruelest irony was that Empress Wang, hoping to use Wu against a rival consort, helped bring her back. She thought she was introducing a useful weapon into the palace. She had no idea she was bringing in the woman who would one day overshadow them all. When Wu returned to court, she was no longer the forgotten girl from Taizong's harem. She understood the palace too well now. She knew affection was unstable, favor was political, and survival depended on reading every movement around her. She quickly bore a son and rose to the rank of Zhai. From then on, everything accelerated. Jealousy, accusation, court factions, ritual arguments. And the battle over, who would stand closest to the emperor. The struggle with Empress Wang and consort Xiao became one of the turning points of her life. Gaozong wanted to raise her still higher. Some ministers objected. Court morality objected. Memory itself objected, because Wu had once belonged to the previous emperor's household. None of it stopped her. The women above her fell. Their families suffered. Senior officials who resisted her most fiercely were pushed aside. And in the end, Wu became empress. She had crossed the line between the inner palace and the machinery of the state. For many women, becoming empress would have been the summit. For Wu, it was only the beginning of the real ascent. Gaozong's health worsened, and as his body weakened, her political reach expanded. She began by assisting in state decisions. Then she listened behind the curtain. Soon, ministers understood that the real nerve center of the empire no longer sat only on the dragon throne in front, but also behind the screen where the empress watched, listened, and decided. That was how the court arrived at the famous pairing of the two saints. Outwardly, Gaozong and Wu ruled together. In practice, more and more of the empire's decisive energy flowed through her. She was not merely clever at palace intrigue. She could govern, and she knew that a ruler who wished to stand at the center of an empire had to do more than defeat rivals. A ruler had to build systems, reward talent, and keep the country moving. Wu paid attention to agriculture and taxation. She supported measures that encouraged farming and reduced burdens. She broadened channels for advice and showed real interest in administration. She gathered scholars, sponsored writing projects, and helped create an intellectual world around the throne. She also expanded the civil service examinations, weakening the monopoly of the great aristocratic families and making room for men of ability from less powerful backgrounds. These were not the acts of a decorative empress. They were the acts of someone preparing to rule. Yet this is also where the danger deepened. The more ability she possessed, the more terrible she could become when that ability was turned toward securing supreme power. Wu did not want only to assist. She did not want merely to influence. Every temporary role she entered became a platform for something larger. She moved through them all, favored consort, empress, partner in rule, without ever mistaking them for the final destination. When Gaozong died, the moment of truth arrived. Her son Zhongzong became emperor, but he quickly showed signs of wanting to strengthen his wife's family and assert his own will. Wu did not hesitate. She deposed him and replaced him with another son, Ruizong, who sat on the throne while she ruled from above it. From that point forward, the fiction of male sovereignty grew thinner and thinner. Everyone understood where real power lived. To hold that power, she opened the gates of fear. Bronze complaint boxes were set out to encourage denunciations. Commoners, minor officials, and opportunists alike could accuse others. Informing became a road to advancement. If the accusation pleased the throne, reward might follow. Under this system, secrecy, suspicion, and terror flourished. Wu's regime did not rely only on brilliance. It also relied on making others afraid of what might happen if they stood in her way. The names of cruel investigators and political enforcers soon became infamous. Men like Zhou Xing and Lai Junchen came to symbolize a world in which accusation could become a death sentence. Those who fell into the machinery of political investigation often never emerged. The empire still glittered with ceremony, but behind the ceremonial red columns and polished floors lay interrogation. Dread and blood, Wu Zetian was building order, but she was also building a state that could crush enemies without mercy. That contradiction is the heart of her story. She opened routes upward for talent, broadened the examination system, and made it easier for men outside the old noble clans to rise. At the same time, she fostered a political atmosphere thick with fear. She governed effectively, yet ruled harshly. She was capable of rewarding merit, yet also capable of wiping out whole lines of opposition. She cannot be reduced to a single label, because she held order and terror in the same hand. At last, in 690, she took the final step that no woman before her had dared to take in her own name. Through political theater, court support, and religious prophecy, she replaced Tang with Zhou and declared herself emperor. What had seemed impossible became fact. The girl who had entered the palace at 14, the discarded concubine turned nun, the woman who fought her way back into favor, now sat on the highest throne under heaven as sovereign in her own right. The empire around her changed color with her ascent. Court ritual, Buddhist symbolism, architectural spectacle, and imperial ceremony all served the new order. Temples were promoted. Sacred texts were used to support her legitimacy. Monumental projects proclaimed her greatness. This was not merely a seizure of office. It was a rewriting of political imagination itself. She was not asking to be treated as a woman who ruled unusually well. She was demanding to be recognized as emperor. And yet the higher she climbed, the less room remained for softness, trust, or retreat. To stay on the throne, she had to keep balancing the claims of the Wu family against the Li imperial line. She had to deal with rebellions, princes, ministers, military threats, and every whisper of conspiracy. At the frontiers, she used both force and diplomacy, sometimes with success, sometimes at heavy cost. She was no longer managing a palace or even a court faction. She was carrying the full strain of empire. Still, even while fear spread through the court, another side of her rule continued. She promoted examinations more aggressively than before, making office feel possible for men beyond the ancient noble houses. She recognized ability in people who did not possess the right lineage. Under her, the examination system became not just a test, but a new door into political life. That change would outlast her. It helped shift the empire further away from inherited privilege and toward administered merit, however imperfectly. The same woman who encouraged new talent also demanded loyalty on frightening terms. Members of the imperial Li house lived in fear. Some were destroyed, some were forced into ruin. The palace itself became a place where every smile might conceal strategy, and every silence might hide danger. Wu had climbed into a position never designed for her, and because it was never designed for her, she could not afford the slightest weakness. Her triumph required a perpetual readiness to strike. Age, however, does not yield even to the strongest ruler. In her later years, questions of succession returned with terrible force. Her nephews Wu Chengxi and Wu Sanxi hoped the throne might remain within the Wu line. They and their allies reminded her that emperors did not usually pass the realm to another surname. At the deepest level, the question was no longer only political, it was personal. Was she first the founder of a new dynasty, or the mother of sons born into the old one? At that critical moment, Dai Renji spoke with unusual courage and clarity. He asked which bond was closer, that between aunt and nephew or that between mother and son. If she restored her son, he argued, he would continue the ancestral line and honor her after death. If she chose a nephew, she might gain a political continuation but lose the deeper human and dynastic claim. His words reached something inside her that political calculation alone could not settle. In the end, she recalled Li Xian and restored him as heir. It was one of the most revealing decisions of her life. For all her iron discipline and political audacity, she was not empty of human feeling. She trusted Dai Renji deeply and grieved him deeply. His presence reminded the court, and perhaps reminded her, that even the hardest ruler does not live by strategy alone. But old age was already entering the palace like winter. Her body weakened. Her judgment no longer cut with the same precision. New favorites rose, among them the Zhang brothers, whose beauty and influence quickly became notorious. Courtiers rushed to flatter them. The atmosphere of the late court turned more unstable, more indulgent, and more dangerous. It is one of history's cruelest patterns. Those who seize supreme control often begin by mastering others and end by struggling to master time. Then came the final reversal. In 705, ministers and commanders struck. They launched a palace coup, killed the Zhang brothers, surrounded the sick and elderly ruler, and forced her to abdicate. There is something especially stark about this ending. Wu Zetian was not overthrown in the fire of her youth. She was overthrown at 81, exhausted and physically weakened, unable to respond as she once would have done. The power she had built over decades slipped from her grasp in a single violent political night. She yielded the throne to her son, and with that act the Zhou dynasty ended and Tang returned. The woman who had changed the very name of the empire was reduced once more, officially, to a former ruler. She moved into retirement at Shangyang Palace. The woman who had once bent an empire around her will now lived with memory, fading ceremony, and the long echo of what she had dared to do. Before her death, she ordered that her imperial title be removed and that she be remembered again as empress. She was later buried with Geazong at Qianling. There, one of the most haunting symbols in Chinese history remained behind, the blank stele. No triumphant inscription fixed her meaning. No simple sentence explained her life. The empty stone suited her better than certainty ever could. That is because Wu Zetian was too complicated for a single verdict. Some condemned her as a usurper and a destroyer of moral order. Others praised her administrative talent, her support for examinations, her ability to recognize and employ capable men, and her role in strengthening the empire. Later generations demonized her, defended her, feared her, admired her, and argued over her without end. She shattered expectations, but she also built institutions. She inspired awe and disgust at once. She remains impossible to flatten. And that is why her story still matters. Wu Zetian walked from temple back to palace, from concubine to empress, from empress to empress dowager, and from empress dowager to emperor. She completed nearly every path a woman was never supposed to complete in her world. Yet the summit she reached was not made of light. It was made of brilliance, blood, loneliness, and cost. Thank you for sailing with us through the story of Wu Zetian. If you enjoyed this journey, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Leave a comment below and tell us whose story you would like to hear next. On Story Sail English, we do not just tell history, we bring it to life. See you in the next story.